Hey, Design Systems Podcast listeners. We're running our first ever survey on design system adoption. It's going to be part of an upcoming report we're going to be publishing, and we'd love to hear about your experiences. The link to the survey is in the show notes. Go ahead and check it out. Really appreciate it. Hi, and welcome to the Design Systems Podcast, the place where design and development overlap. Brought to you by Knapsack. Check us out at knapsack.cloud.
Hey everyone, I'm here today with Danny Phillips. He's the Group Engineering Manager for Design Systems at Procore, and Robin Cannon, the Global Director of Design Systems for IBM iX. We're going to be talking about ROI, thinking about how design systems are funded inside of organizations, and really looking at how to represent that ROI if you're an individual contributor, and how to think about that ROI if you're a manager that's evaluating a design system. Welcome, guys. Really excited for this conversation. Glad we were able to get it going.
No, thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
So both of your organizations kind of have a different take on how to represent design system ROI. Robin, obviously, IBM has an interest in your own design system, but also an interest in thinking about the design systems of other organizations. Likewise, Danny, you have a design system that is, pretty mature inside of Procore and has gone through a lot of iterations. I kind of just want to set the stage for this by thinking about why ROI is important kind of from your different perspectives.
Sure. I think from my perspective, well, coming from having been the program director of Carbon and looking at it internally, that was about getting an internal permission structure, initially to just pay any attention or put any resources, even as a kind of side project towards a design system, to growing that, to developing it and demonstrating its value, to getting it resourced and growing. Now, my new role is basically there is a clear demand for design systems. I think there is an understanding in the market as a whole, companies of all different types, that design systems have some kind of value. So there is an interest in engaging with experts, and that's what I'm doing now from an IBM iX perspective, engaging with clients and partners to help them build their design systems. But then, how do they value that? How do they make a justification to the relevant stakeholders in their company to pay IBM or somebody else to provide that expertise? And how do they justify the long-term kind of internal resourcing for a design system team if they want to go that kind of path, or really just the cost of people and overhead to have a design system?
Awesome. And then Danny, yours is a little bit different in terms of your background because it's been predominantly with Procore. And I'm kind of curious to think about your journey there and how that ROI conversation came to the forefront.
Yeah, I think design systems were something we looked at 5 years ago, and like you said, they weren't. Now they're mainstream, but at the time, nobody really talked about them or understood them. I think the big first hurdle was just identifying the problem. I think we all felt inefficiencies in our business, and a lot of them we kind of realized could be solved with the design system. And so getting that message communicated in the organization was our first way to get buy-in. And then from there, it was about delivering by building a design system and evolving it and then getting adoption on it. And so the key piece of the ROI is we can build the best design system the business needs, but if nobody's adopting it, it's not providing any value to the business. And so really the second chapter of our story was about driving adoption and really meeting the demand of the business so that we could deliver the value for the company.
Yeah, I kind of love the two sides of this, right? Because Robin, for you, a large part of this was getting something like Carbon off the ground. A big bet, if you will, into the design system space to create this thing that's public that hundreds, if not thousands, of other organizations consume and use. Versus Danny, very focused on how we get adoption within an organization and drive that conversation forward from a point of basically an experiment inside of a company. A very intentional one.
I think we come from the same starting point because Carbon was and is IBM's design system first and foremost. And it started as a desire to bring some consistency initially in IBM Cloud, then matured over time to be acknowledged as the most mature design system and therefore the design system for digital and software products at IBM. And it's still primarily IBM's design system, but with a cultural approach of we're going to make this open source. Now, in my new role in iX, part of my role is talking about how we can leverage Carbon and how other companies can leverage Carbon as an accelerator. But I'm not just pitching Carbon. It's also about the design system, governance, understanding. So whether it's Carbon, whether it's another design system that already exists, or whether it's helping a partner to build their own design system from scratch, that expertise, governance, scale, the journey of a design system and the value that you get at particular steps on that journey is the really important story I'm telling now.
Yeah, so why is that important? Like, why, as a person evaluating a design system at an executive level that's looking at a multi-million-dollar spend on a product that doesn't directly serve customers, why does that person care? And likewise, why does that product manager or engineering or design manager look at that ROI conversation relative to their individual team?
For me, I think you kind of captured it yourself. It is a product that does not directly serve a consumer or an end user. It is a product that serves the teams building other products. And therefore, it's always going to be a cost center in some way. And cost centers need a good justification of the benefit that they're bringing to the business. And I think with design systems in particular, it's easier to kind of measure the anecdotal or qualitative benefits and to talk about those with a lot of passion. It's more difficult because of that step removed from the end user to demonstrate the quantitative benefits.
I think you asked why would an executive care about this, and I think one of the problems I think executives solve is trying to scale their business. And I think at scale is really where design systems have the biggest returns. If you're a small team, there's not a lot of reason to build a design system because you don't have those scaling challenges and inefficiencies. And so I think the real value prop of the design system is how do you create an efficient way to operate your business at large scales. And that's really, I think, as you continue to grow your business, the design system has more and more value if you invest in it.
You brought up a really interesting point there where the idea of scale comes into play. ROI is typically in those terms of better, faster, stronger. And I want to get to that in thinking about how, better, faster, cheaper. I want to get
stronger as well.
Yeah, hopefully stronger. I want to get into that in a minute, but I am kind of curious. One of the things you brought up was scale, and I think that this is an interesting point inside of design systems that I'm exploring right now, which is this idea of ROI being a function of scaling digital products inside of the organization, or creating something that's new and spreading it between products in an organization. And so if you're a big company that is trying to reinvent your industry or reinvent your category or do something really unique and innovative and interesting, it's a lot about spreading that innovation between your different digital touch points. So I've changed the world of e-commerce and my product browsing experience is better than anybody else's product browsing experience that has ever existed. I want to make sure that product browsing experience exists in as much of my ecosystem as possible, versus a healthcare company that is probably not going to reinvent the way that we do healthcare in the United States, but has a problem with scaling across clinics or physicians or clinical trials or any number of other things that are not necessarily particularly innovative, but do represent a problem of scale. And I think that there is kind of an attack on either side of this, right? These people that are doing truly unique things that are trying to be revolutionary from a design or a engineering standpoint versus folks that are really looking to capture that scale side of that story. Do you guys have experiences on both sides of that coin?
I think from the scale perspective, making things reusable means it's easier to just scale them fast. And it also means that you're bringing consistency. Just by having a reusable component, then you're not going to have 10 different minor variations of that component that have had 10 different designers and developers work on it. So you've saved time and you brought consistency, and you probably brought consistency not just in design but in the underlying code quality. So you can do that. That lets you just replicate, and that makes it easier to get to scale. And then I think in terms of bringing like a good experience, particularly if you're a company, an enterprise scale company that has a broad set of experiences, if you just bring it in isolation and there is inconsistency between the different experiences as a user moves through your product or your offering, then you're going to lose the benefit of that uniqueness and lose the benefit of that innovation unless you can make it more universal.
Yeah, and I think that to that point, real quick, when you think about the idea of that scaling, like how do I bring that consistency and that ability from experience to experience to experience, like that is something that's pretty quantitative. You can say, I spent X hours designing this reusable pattern. That saves me Y hours every time that pattern gets implemented, which equals a Z like relatively concrete ROI. I think the harder part of that is I spent X amount of time building this really unique, innovative experience that has a lot of value in the market. Now I can bring that experience to Y number of products. Is there a ZROI related to that also? That is about like making this really innovative leap in my application and being able to bring that to my whole ecosystem of apps.
Yeah, that's something that Procore is starting to look into is, we actually have an external ecosystem of applications that other companies can build integrations with Procore. And one of the big value props they see is, taking some of our features and functionality through our design system to power their applications. And so as we've matured, it's gotten less out of, we've kind of walked away from the design token space and more towards these larger full feature sets that are part of the offering of our design system, and they have even larger returns if they're used in their full feature set.
Yeah, that's where when we think about that better, faster, cheaper, maybe stronger conversation, that feels like the better to me. That idea that I can take innovation really rapidly from one part of my application ecosystem and bring it to another. So rather than these like very bespoke lanes of application development across a suite of applications, I can more easily share that feature set that may be beneficial in one app with another app. And then obviously like the faster, cheaper side of things is bringing this consistency, this maintenance, this scale to an organization. Are there other examples that you guys can think of that represent that ROI to companies?
I think you can talk about improved experiences. And it's a difficult one to manage because the design system is at least one step removed from the product team that is actually measuring the improved end user experience. So you could say we've freed up designers and developers so that they can focus very specifically on their domain space without having to worry about solving the problems that have already been solved. A brief example I use very regularly is something like IBM Watson Health. If you're a designer on Watson Health, would you prefer to be redesigning the header or the login experience or the button? Or would you prefer to be focusing your efforts on designing a genuine solution that's going to help doctors, physicians reach better health outcomes? So that's the kind of opportunity cost of freeing up the ability of designers and developers to innovate. What then needs to be done really, and this is where it's difficult to draw that direct line, is the design system is reliant on that product team to come back to them and say, we use the design system, we took advantage of this opportunity cost, and it's improved our metrics, so whether it's in terms of customer acquisition or churn or NPS and so on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think about that also in terms of pretty simple measures, like things like accessibility or performance. Those are the two that stick out to me, right? Like I create an accessible pattern, I create a performant pattern. I should be able to reap most of the benefits of that accessibility or that performance in the implementation of that pattern. And that's I guess it's a little bit more tangible to me than like these teams will be focused on the ability to create these like really unique or really compelling experiences. I think that does happen. But I think the really concrete method for that is looking at something like accessibility, where you basically say like, 30% of our experiences or 50% of our experiences met WCAG AA. Now 100% of them do. I don't know. I feel like there's maybe multiple facets to this, and one of them could be really concrete and grounded in that data, while others are a little less tangible.
Yeah, I think you can get that quality baked in. And I think Danny, when he's talking about Procore's more holistic approach, so it's not just on a component by component basis, but actually like templates and experiences, and be able to have more insights in how that can really demonstrate value.
It's interesting you bring that up because actually a problem we face at Procore is getting platform adoption. And ironically, I think our design system was the facet that had the best adoption of our platform. And so we found a lot of platform teams actually coming to the design system to be our vehicle for getting adoption for things like translations for international markets, or even just unit test coverage of the front end because our components had great coverage. And so we were actually finding these other value props of the design system that weren't at all in the initial founding of why we built it, but it was working, so teams were using us as the vehicle.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think the same held true for Carbon. If you look at something like accessibility, teams have to, whatever they're building, they're going to have to check accessibility, and if a lot of that can be baked in at the design system level, then that's going to save them time. It's a good way of encouraging adoption and enthusiastic adoption, because we're just making developers and designers' lives easier.
So what about things like other stuff you hear in design systems? What about things like tokens and cross-platform capability? So when you think about this idea of, hey, web design systems are really prevalent, native design systems less so. When I think about the acquisition of my digital surface area inside of an organization, and I look at the coverage of that surface area within a centralized pattern repository, where does that factor into the ROI conversation? Because native apps are becoming more prevalent as people sort of understand that there's more data you can collect in native platforms. There's things you can do in native platforms that are still challenging on the web, but web is kind of where a lot of this started. How do you think about that ecosystem coverage as a part of the ROI story?
I think theming is something that I'm looking into a lot at the moment as I look more externally and how we engage with multiple clients, and the extent to which design systems can be themable, can be applied effectively to more than one brand. Because if you have that capacity, then it's easier for us to accelerate how we're assisting those partners. Whereas if everything had to be a design system built from scratch, then eventually you're still going to get all the benefits of the design system, but actually the building of the design system still needs to happen. So I think that as design systems expand their theming capability, it makes it easier for them to be more flexible for different types of enterprises and different brands to take on board. I agree that there is a lot more robustness to the web side of design systems. I think I've seen a lot more design kits and design guidance on the mobile side of things, but I don't think it's a true design system unless there is reusable code, and I think that that's less prevalent just because I think there are more restrictions on the mobile side of things to being able to have that very, very reusable, very, very shareable componentized development.
Just the number of templating languages on the native side is really challenging.
Yeah.
No, I hear what you're saying. I think that one of the things that we thought about pretty early on in Knapsack was how do we think about supporting organizations across hundreds or thousands of applications, and that themability and that template ability, where you think about kind of the inheritance structure that's innate in design systems, right? I have this core that represents my core brand, and then there's usually some level of product design system or some level of product group design system. There's a central node, and then there's a few spokes that come off of that represent things to individual products in most large organizations. One of the things that we've been trying to think about in this space about how to make these systems more able to touch more of a surface area is that themability via tokens. And so the ability to basically say, I can define different token sets as sets that represent a brand, and that set of tokens can be applied to any code pattern in my design system. And that allows you to support hundreds, if not thousands, of applications across a single code base. And then you can start to get into the idea of how do I create more specific, more niche implementations of a design system for a particular group inside of an organization. So, you look at a big e-commerce company, right? Well, not all the applications of that design system are going to be commerce driven. There's going to be a bunch of them that are HR applications or kiosks or retail stores or something like that. You're going to want to think about implementations of those things in a different template structure than you would in the main design system. I'm kind of curious to hear if you guys have thought about that problem, and specifically as it relates to the surface area of the system inside of that application ecosystem.
Yeah, maybe I could make a couple of comments on the tokens and themability side, and then Danny can talk about the template side of things. Um, just because Procore does more of that kind of more opinionated templating, I guess. From the token side, like it's a fine balance because if everything's tokenizable, then you're going to lose the consistency that a design system brings if you can just change everything. But I think the ability to build tokens that then can become themes that have enough flexibility to apply to multiple types of brands, then I think you've got a lot of value. So the Carbon Design System at IBM has 4 different themes that are all IBM themes, but just variants of that. But you can't then take that and apply that to something like, I don't know, Nike, because the whole brand ethos and the whole approach is very different. And there are restrictions in terms of, the size and shape of components, where the border radius is used, whether things like drop shadows and things like that are used. So that's outside of the scope of the theme. And once you customize too much from a design system, then you lose some of the ability to inherit improvements. So that's the balance from the token side. I think you want to be able to build relatively flexible themes, but maintain the underlying consistency that means that you're able to long-term be supported by that foundation and inherit its update, particularly from my perspective, across multiple different types of brands.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think there's a line that you're balancing there, right? And we found that there's even some products that fall on the other side of the line. And then for those, we've looked at like a systems of systems model where there's, a fundamental set of tokens that everybody, can inherit from, but then there's specialized token sets that can be used in certain product offerings. Like our financial offering is so different from the rest of our products to theme them across the different product lines would be they lose their inherent value that they have. And so really we've kind of split into some other systems of systems so that you can get value in the design system, but then also have it follow the brand and the direction that it's going.
Yeah, and I think there's a really fascinating point there because I've also thought a lot about like the ecosystem of a design system, and that this kind of hub and spoke model that you do have this kind of central universal piece, but particularly as they scale, there are going to be different product teams, different business units, different brands within the same organization that are going to have some variant needs, and what you want to be able to do is facilitate their ability to ship with those changes without them having to abandon the design system. And so you want to have as much universal, but then the ability to not be a bottleneck, to enable some flexibility within the governance of that ecosystem.
Yeah, it feels like there's like 3 levels that are sort of nascent here. The idea of I have my centralized system where if I forced everybody to use everything in that centralized system at all times, that's too rigid. And then there's another level, which is like I want to intentionally introduce fragmentation into my system, but have that fragmentation intentionally be focused on the needs of a particular product or a particular group of people. And then there's also the idea of overrides or snowflakes, like the actual bespoke pieces that truly go outside of the system. And within that tiered framework of things, I feel like that encompasses the majority of use cases in trying to understand the coverage of a design system inside an ecosystem.
I agree, and I think that when I talk about the ways in which you can use a design system, I use those exact same 3 levels. And really, the biggest fuzzy line is between 2 and 3. Is between the ability to fragment or intentionally deviate from the design system.
It's maybe a better word.
Within set parameters, and you're still doing it within the overall design system architecture. And then the point at which you become bespoke and you start overriding that design system architecture, which is going to give you a lot more flexibility in terms of presentation, but is going to reduce your flexibility in terms of being able to inherit updates. You're going to lose the longer term support benefits, and you're also just going to have more effort up front to build the experience that you're trying to build. There's benefits to both sides where that line exists and how you can best support that kind of fuzzy division between those two, particularly from an IX perspective at IBM when we're working with multiple different clients, is where do we suggest let's do something bespoke or custom, or even let's build a new design system that is yours, let's co-create a design system with you, or where do we use something out of the box that has just enough theming for what you need?
I definitely feel like that gets into the realm of analytics really quickly, which is kind of this exciting frontier in design systems that hasn't been really fleshed out yet. I'm eager to get there. Danny, does that match your experience too?
It's almost a perfect description of what we have done at Procore, which is so validating to hear. We had the same three buckets in terms of how we looked at adoption. And actually, that's what we communicated to the executive team in terms of driving adoption for the business. The core set of components, we really tried to make sure we got every business unit using them because they are so fundamental. There's no reason you shouldn't be. And then it started to tail off as those other buckets got introduced. And, the snowflakes, there really was no need to drive adoption. Those are just available as needed. And it actually made those adoption metrics actually became formulas into our ROI calculations in terms of what components do we actually measure to see the value for the business.
Yeah, that measurement piece is really interesting. I think that there's lots of measurements that you can think about in terms of a design system. You can think about the core design system use case, right? So what are the people that are maintaining the design system doing inside of it? Where are they spending their time? Where is their effort going to? There's the consumptive side of it too. So the consumers of the design system, what are they consuming from that system and how are they using it? And then there's like the further thing that's much more removed, which is what are end users doing in user land with those components? And that's pretty difficult to measure right now. Like there's a pretty big chasm between that central system and that user. But gathering that data at those different levels, again, maybe we're relying too much on the rule of threes here, but looking at that across those three levels, I think that paints the data picture that people really need to understand how their design system is functionally working and allow them to make choices about where they get the most ROI in terms of components.
Where it's interesting, actually. I think that calculation, it's pretty easy or possible now to calculate. Here's kind of like the effort it takes to deploy a component within the design system and then replicate that and the total effort. The problem is actually going back and saying, well, what are we comparing it to? Mm-hmm. Was anybody measuring any of the effort beforehand?
Where's my baseline?
Where's the baseline? That's I think actually probably the most difficult problem is that there's very few baselines. So you can say, hey, it's super efficient because we can do all this in this time and it's this much designer time and this much developer time. But particularly for an executive having to make a business case for funding, they need some kind of baseline. And I think a lot of that baseline has to come from research, and it has to come from basically going back through projects, going back through sprint boards, going back through interviews, and just really trying to come up with an after the fact best estimate of what the effort was. We did a lot of that, or the IBM Cloud Platform did a lot of that to kind of distinguish between the effort for a component pre-usage of the Carbon design system or any design system versus the implementation once you did have a design system that was reusable. But that baseline is actually the tougher thing to find than the data of the actual design system implementation itself.
Yeah, we give our customers a scorecard, kind of like right when they start their journey on Knapsack. And a large part of that is like you need to be filling this out now so that you understand where you've started, where you're headed. And we have a pathway that people use to get on our app, and it's very product led and everything like that. The idea being that at every single point, you should be able to see a measurable change in that metric that you're defining as success, be that adoption or implementation of components or whatever. And it kind of leading people by the hand around that adoption story. And I know, Danny, you're very into this, but the idea of like leading people down that adoption pathway and showing how that's changing things along the way, that's a really valuable way of building an ROI case for a design system inside an organization.
Yeah, adoption is something that's been really, I think, a challenge for Procore over the years. And I think we're just now starting to get our muscle memory here. There's kind of two sides to it, right? Like the design system team who's building the components needs to build the right components and deliver them at the right time. If they deliver a component, but it's a month after the big release, the team was not able to use it, and it really didn't deliver any value for the business. And so there's this big piece when leading a design system team around advertising our roadmap and really aligning it to the business so that we can hit all the key milestones for the business so that adoption makes sense. Because if we don't deliver the right components at the right time, there isn't going to be adoption. And then the second half of that is communicating to the business that adoption is really how we all benefit from the design system. If nobody adopts it, we're really just spinning our wheels here, building components. And so really there's this kind of educational piece, but also this coaching and leading a design system team to build the right things at the right time.
Yeah, and there's calculations that you can use, and the IBM Cloud Platform team came up with a good algorithm on a component by component basis. So you could start calculating using a design system and not using a design system. If you don't have a design system, here is the effort from a design perspective, the effort from a development perspective, and the effort from a maintenance perspective to build component X. And you can get like this many hours, but then you multiply that 15 times if that component is used in 15 places because there's nothing reusable. Whereas if you then, even if you double the initial creation effort of the component, but it's reusable within a design system, and it's 5 or 10 hours across those 15 different teams just to adopt it and integrate it into their interface, then you see massive 70-80% efficiency savings on a component by component basis.
Yeah. So when you put those numbers in front of people, do they believe you?
They do. They do ask, how did you come to this figure? And I think, you do have to, we do have to be very clear that, this was based on a lot of research and a lot of calculation internally after the fact, because we're going back to kind of come up with that baseline. But I think where it's really beneficial for me now when I'm talking externally is that we didn't come up with that baseline for external consumption initially. That was come up with so that the IBM Cloud Platform team, the designers and developers and project managers on that team, were using it to get their executives to give them more resource to have essentially that subsystem, the cloud platform pattern and asset library, utilizing the design system and tweaking it for cloud platform. They were using it internally to justify the return on investment. And therefore, that makes it, for me now talking externally, a much more powerful story.
It's grounded in reality.
Yeah, it's grounded in reality, and it's not grounded in an intent to prove it.
It's really interesting. I back when I used to do a lot more of the consultative side on the design systems, we used to use Microsoft's figures that were out there that were like, we saved 78% on this component, and people had a really hard time believing that, largely because that's a massive savings. Say you got 80% component coverage and you're saving 80% on 80%. That's a heap of savings across a multi-100 person design and development team. And that thought process behind how you get there seemed unbelievable to a lot of people. In particular, Danny, in your experience, did you use any of this data when you were thinking about the expansion of the Procore design system? And how did you actually go about being believed when you talked about this stuff?
The short answer to that is we showed the math, but then we also told the stories behind the math. And I think the stories really were supportive of teams that released product a month early because they were able to leverage the design system. Like, that's a real tangible outcome, and the math adds up for that. But yeah, effectively, our the formula that we used was really the cost of building it n times minus the cost of the platform building it, even if they're building it at half speed or twice as much work to make it platformized. And generally that resulted in like, I think, a 30% reduction in resourcing if it was all across the business, which is pretty crazy. Like, you could get rid of 100 engineers or have 100 extra engineers, however you look at it. That was a little bit weird to swallow, but I think that's a good problem to have, right? Like, that we've uncovered this huge opportunity for the business, and we just have to get the teams aligned to capitalize on it. So I think the answer to your question, though, is really talking about these case studies with different teams around how they're able to build a product with a very lean team of 2 engineers, or how they were able to take something that was slated, a few quarters out and they delivered, a quarter early, or expand the product scope because, they have the extra time now. It's a way better offering than they ever thought they could deliver on.
I always love the concept of the unfinished to-do list, right? Every single designer I've ever talked to has always said, I wish I had more time to do X or Y or Z in the application. And I always talk about design systems as giving them back that time so that they can maybe tackle that, extra 2 or 3 things that were things they've always wanted to do inside of their product, but have never had the time to do.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's allowing, that's the empowering part of a design system for designers. Because I think, there can be some fear even or concern about a design system from a designer's perspective that, this is going to be too much of a limitation. Whereas actually that is how you say, no, it's going to empower you to really design for the problems that you really want to solve, not the problems that kind of are already been solved. And that because we're freeing up your time and we'll be able to demonstrate the kind of time and efficiency that we're going to give you, your product owners, your project managers, your executives are also going to trust that. And therefore, you're going to have their support to be able to address those things further down your to-do list as well.
So I do want to kind of talk about the nuclear option, if you will, inside of design systems real quick, right? So you have this idea that design systems are going to make you move, whether it's 30% faster, 80% faster, but ultimately it solves this problem of scale and this problem of innovation sharing inside of these organizations. With COVID, with just the general progress of technology, we've seen the surface area of digital experiences across major companies explode. And everybody knows there's not enough designers and developers in the world to 10x the size of every company's team, even though most teams are being asked to represent 10x the surface area in applications. These people are screwed, right? Like these leaders of these companies that all of a sudden have this massive ecosystem that they have to support that is having ever-increasing consumer demands on them. Are design systems the way we solve this problem for the whole industry, for the whole step change in the way we think about building digital experiences across companies?
It's a fun question. I think the danger in saying this is the solution across the industry is that you step away from the design aspect of it and the quality aspect of it, and it becomes just another kind of toolkit to ship stuff. And I think that's my biggest concern about thinking of it from that perspective, because the other return on investment for design is the qualitative one, is that this makes things better as well as the faster and cheaper. And if you just say this is the universal solution for everyone, then it's all about the faster and cheaper.
Right. Then it's tooling, not a product.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
What about you, Danny? What do you think about that?
I think there's some truth to it. I think you're totally right in that you don't want to push bad quality all around your application. That's not really a win for your business. But I do think there is this increasing demand to do more with less. And I think that's really the heart of a design system, is empowering your business to do a lot more with a lot less. And I don't know if it's the only way, but it seems like a sure obvious way that if you're not doing it already, it's a great way to get some efficiency back in your business.
Yeah.
I think just by nature of creating a default, 80% of people will just do the default if the default exists. Now, the danger is if that's the danger is if that's a bad default, then 80% of people will still use it. But yeah, a design system creates a default. So a good design system will create a default of quality, both from a design perspective and a development perspective. And then you make good quality the path of least resistance.
Right. And so I view this as an opportunity for solving that chief digital officer's pain of my ecosystem has, tripled in size in a year. It is more than just scale. It's about scale and quality at the same time. And it's very rare that you find a step change in any sort of way of working that does hit on all 3 of those things: better, faster, and cheaper. And I think that design systems does a really good job of encompassing that. And I agree with you completely, Robin. There's definitely a danger of emphasizing the cheaper and maybe even the faster over the better, because better is hard. But I do view this as a step change inside of our industry, where I think you're going to think about this as a world where these sorts of systems didn't exist and now they do as a replacement to bespoke app development.
I think what I tell you what's an interesting conversation that comes up, or an interesting piece of feedback that comes up, is because we can't think of design systems as existing in isolation, and we can't think of design systems as always building like on greenfield. So actually, and Phil Gilbert, the general manager of IBM Design, gave me this feedback about the Carbon design system. And he's like, the issue is not that people are reluctant to use the IBM Design system to build a new user interface. The issue is that they currently have an interface, and they have too many other business pressures to prioritize changing the interface anyway. And so it's like, it's not that, it's like, sure, if I was building a new UI, I would absolutely use a design system. But actually, I just need to ship feature, or product change. And that's less of a priority than making the migration to, that's more of a priority than making the migration to a design system. And so that's a different business pressure, is that we know, I think, from within the industry, there is often, or almost universally sometimes, we felt that desire to push new features than to go and make the underlying architecture and foundation of everything you're building better. A design system is very much a case of slow down now to go faster and better over the long term. But I think everybody who's worked in the industry as a designer or a developer has made those arguments in lots of different situations, not just related to design systems, and the business pressures have made it difficult to move in that direction.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Like, it's hard to sell a design system if what you're selling is something they already have, right? I think the thing that we found at Procore was trying to find other ways to incentivize the system. And one way we did that was where to position our design system in terms of on this spectrum of, the bleeding edge of innovation for the business. If you're lagging the business, you have all the legacy components that everybody needs, but you don't have anything new for the greenfield products. But then if you're on the bleeding edge, you're so far different that it's out of reach for any of the existing products, unless they're doing some new venture. And so there's this kind of balancing act in terms of what do you build and where do you position yourselves in terms of the innovation you bake into your design system to really try to become compelling to all parties that you want to see adoption from.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity in terms of creating the design system and not having insane pressure to adopt very quickly, because I think that that's where you get a big degree of pushback. So the design system is here. These teams are already building a new user interface or new features, and they're going to use the design system, and that's going to be the first use case. This legacy product, sure, in a year, it's probably going to need to update its user interface and its presentation layer. That's the point at which we facilitate their design system adoption in full. And by removing some of that pressure and saying this is a resource to help you, it's not something that is there to make your life harder or to give you extra work. That's really important for that adoption conversation.
That's actually really interesting, because we did something similar when looking at our kind of adoption metrics and what we thought was realistic. We actually looked at every business unit in our product and technology department, and there's some that are ready for adoption because their roadmaps are really aligned with the offering of the design system, and there's others that aren't. And so we really didn't think of them as our primary customer, nor should we be driving adoption or beating ourselves up because we don't have the adoption in that space yet, because I think you're totally right. Timing is key here, and making the design system available is key for the business, but adoption is going to happen at the spaces where the work is happening.
Yeah. I kind of look at it as make the design system the good guy, not the bad guy. So basically, you basically create a situation where the design system is there, and the pressure to adopt the design system and to change the user interface or improve the user interface or improve the development architecture comes from elsewhere than the design system. So there is a business director or an executive mandate to migrate to the new design language and to the new design system. Then the design system itself comes in and says, hey, we realize you're under this business pressure to do this thing. We are here to help you and make it easier.
It's also interesting, right? Because we are asking people to undertake a change in the way they work when they implement a design system. And I very often get asked the question as a part of an ROI conversation, like, what does this replace? What are the things inside of my organization that I don't have to do now? that I can basically take off of that set of expenses or set of costs inside of my organization because I have a design system. And I think that it is a little bit more complicated than just the ability to reuse patterns. I think there are things that change around tooling, things that change around workflow that people don't have to do anymore. I'm curious, in your guys' personal experience, what have you seen design systems supplant, replace, change to make a different kind of ROI and that shift from one way of working to another?
Yeah, I actually really like this question because I think it's super relevant. You talk about a step in the business. I think we're seeing this big transition to remote work and a lot of asynchronous work. And I think design systems are so well positioned for this because we are really obviously part of a design system is tooling and component library, but another part's documentation. And so there's a lot of this indecision that happens in the normal workflow of people's day. And the design system kind of creates a lot of decisions for you by giving those defaults. And so there's a lot of meetings that fall off the calendar. There's a lot of the synchronizations with the designers or with the engineers are very focused on key aspects versus broad about the entire feature set because there's so many decisions already made by default. And I think it frees up a lot of people to do a lot of asynchronous work where they can be highly productive on their own time and then come and coordinate with the team on the discrete things they need to talk about.
Yeah, I think that you use the right word, workflow, because it actually brings genuine flow. I think design systems are also a really effective bridge, especially between designers and developers. They work to bring designers and developers far more to working in the same place and talking in the same language and using the same central source of documentation, and here is the intent and here are how these things are. And it massively reduces the scope for confusion or the scope for delays around redlining or things being tossed over a wall. It makes it naturally a more collaborative process because everybody is talking from the same perspective.
I think it's interesting too to see the role of tooling in this because, things like Figma that have created a real-time system for managing design are really showing that collaborative workspace model is super powerful, right? This idea that I have all of the people working in the same place at the same time on the same thing using the same files without having to share them in some external site or email them back and forth, and really working collaboratively together in that moment has a ton of value, especially in the environment that we find ourselves in now where most of this stuff happens on Zoom. Do you see a role that design systems plays in that?
I think it reduces cognitive load. And actually, if you think about the degree to which there's a lot of research in how much time is wasted by context shifting, because you're asked to work on one thing and then somebody comes and interrupts you and asks you to work on another thing. If you're working within the scope of a design system, you've got a common context, even if you're shifting between different projects and different pieces of work. So I actually think it reduces the loss that context shifting brings to you, because there's consistency of tooling, there's consistency of design system platform, and there's a consistency of process.
That's fascinating. I had not thought about it in the cognitive sense before. But it totally makes sense. The idea that, I see the same things in different places is very akin to the way we think about how we represent digital experiences to users, right? If my in-store and online experience look and feel the same, if that experience relative to my support experience also looks and feels the same, reduces the amount of learning I have to do to know how to get done the things that I need to get done.
Yeah, I mean, a design system reduces the cognitive load for an end user. That's one of the benefits of its output, but it definitely also reduces the cognitive load of the people working using the design system itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to draw the comparison. I totally understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think I think language is key. I think that's something that I didn't appreciate when I first was developing our design system, but as it became more and more complex, being able to talk about specific things and know exactly what each other is meaning, it just reduces the confusion, and we can talk quickly about something and make decisions quickly because we have that shared context. I also think it lets you, kind of similar as Robin was talking about, lets you focus on the domain you care about. We could make some decisions really deep on, border radiuses on a specific component really quickly because we all had the context and didn't have to build up the whole backstory around why something needs to change or whatnot. So I think that your work becomes very focused because you have all the shared context and shared language that comes with the design system.
It's interesting that you bring that up too, because when I think about soft ROI, so things like making your business a more attractive place to work, um, design systems are sometimes brought up in that context as well, where designers want to work at companies that have robust design systems. Front-end engineers want to work at companies that have robust design systems because it's a better way of working and it's less chaotic and less of a struggle, because a lot of the tension between design and development, it's still present, but in a very different context, one that's a lot more constructive than a tennis match about fidelity, kind of like Robin was describing earlier. That context is really powerful for a recruitment tool, which has ROI to an organization. Thinking about those soft forms of ROI, do you guys see the recruitment angle? And what else do you see in that?
I think for IBM, the recruitment angle, I think that the very existence of the Carbon design system and its maturity and its acceptance as an excellent example of a design system and its clear adoption across a vast range of offerings that IBM provides, I think has improved the reputation or the profile of IBM from a design perspective, although that's partly because IBM design has also IBM has really focused on design over the last few years, but I think even more so from a front-end development perspective. I think by being open source, by working out in the open as well, I think that it's really increased the reputation of IBM from a front-end developer perspective as somewhere where a front-end developer can go and thrive and be valued. So there's that part. And then it's just easier to get started if there's a good design system. From the very basic sense, if you are a new employee,
your ramp is way reduced.
At the very least, you will know that there's one place where you know to go to get the information you need, instead of worrying about who you need to ask about, where do I find this style guide? Where do I find guidance on this particular product's design? And so on. And so, I think that both from the recruitment perspective and then in the kind of sense of confidence or reference that somebody has joining a company that has a high quality design system, I think there's real benefits.
I think even beyond recruitment, I think onboarding gets really easy. I think it even makes its way out to your customer base, I think, because they get to see design system is really a sense of organization. It's how you organize your internal processes related to design and engineering. And I think that shows itself in its products, and people can even realize that, hey, your business is run in a way that you really care about quality. And I think that even comes all the way through to your customers. So I think the recruitment side is just the beginning of it. And I think people are proud to work at your business. People will stay at your business. Customers will retain being a customer because of the design system.
And then, I mean, from my perspective now, my new role in IBM iX would not exist if IBM did not have internationally recognized high quality design system. My new role, which is essentially defining how IBM presents design systems externally and works with clients to help co-create their design systems, came into being because so many colleagues in IX were asking me over the last year and a half of my time as program director of Carbon, can you please come and talk to my client? Can you please be with me on this pitch? Can you please advise me how to talk effectively about design systems? So that it demonstrated and underpinned a clearly expanding need of design systems as an IBM iX offering, both as standalone and as part of a broader platform offering across the entirety of IBM's global business services.
I want to probe into that a little bit. So I've noticed a lot of change in design system roles at different organizations, right? I think, when I first heard the words design systems circa 2016 or so, I was looking for people that had job titles related to them. And there's very little out there, almost none, I would say. And it's been within the past 12-ish months that you've started to see a lot of these common stakeholders emerge inside of organizations that have design systems titles that cross the functional lines inside of an organization, where they have designers and developers that are rolling up to them in this sort of like systems level approach. And these people are starting to also own budget. I'm kind of curious about your guys' experience there. Are you noticing a change in the way that businesses are organizing their people around design systems? And have you personally seen or experienced that yourself?
I mean, from my perspective, yes. I think that first of all, the conversation now is like, what is no longer what is a design system. The conversation from companies is, we've got bits and pieces that we think might be part of a design system. We've got a style guide, or this product over here has a few components that they reuse, and we have tasked this person or these two people to bring some consistency to it. But we have no real idea of how to scale. What is the path? What is the journey? So I think that, yes, there is still too much of an organizational slant towards the design organization without a development aspect. And I think that is probably, when I talk to companies, that's advice I give. I think this should be cross-disciplinary. This should cross design and development. I talk a lot, actually, that the primary consumers, simply by virtue of the fact that most companies have more of them, of a design system, is going to be developers. And I think too often still a design system and just design guidance, a design language are not well distinguished.
I completely agree with you. Like, yeah, you were channeling my inner voice right there in that. In devs outnumber design 3-5 to 1, maybe even more than that, depending on the industry. You have this situation where that conversation is led by design, and that's fine. But the problem is the absence of that engineering part of that conversation. And it really hampers it. And it's part of the reason why I kind of have a little bit of a beef with just the word design system.
Yeah.
It's so much more than design. But it is good to hear you say that that's reflected in your own experience. And Danny, what about you? How's like the organization change, not just with titling, but the way that people think about organizing the teams at Procore shifted?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a design system team for about 5 years, and it's gone through a number of changes, both internally and then also how the business understands us. It originally was an entire engineering team that I led. And then we started on the other end of the spectrum of just building components and tooling to create efficiency in engineering. And then we had a kind of a sibling team doing the same in design. And then we merged them to be kind of a co-represented design system team with, I had a design counterpart that co-led the organization with me. And that's kind of been our current model, is this partnership with design and engineering. That said, I think there's still a little bit of tension because we've moved around in the business, right? We were in the kind of the application development side, and then realized, well, hey, there's actually a lot of platform we're building. So we came to the platform side, but then felt if we're on the platform, we're too far removed from our end users, and that's really where we need to be tightly integrated with. So we floated now and kind of in the middle, in that we don't really have a clear home because we really are solving for both sides of the business. And then the other thing that we've found is the design system isn't really only one team. We have really good contribution at Procore, and so there's a ton of designers and developers across the organization that are feeding ideas and contributing back to the system. So they are kind of these we actually call them design ambassadors and engineering ambassadors for the business that are coming back to the system. So if you look at the members of the design system, it's this centralized team with really key ambassadors across the business that are driving adoption or providing feedback and iteration to the system. And so it's hard to really draw the line of where does where are the formal members of the team and when do they stop?
I think that's really important, actually. A design system is a community as much as it is a thing, and from my perspective, it needs to do that to scale. I talk about once you're far enough into the design system journey, a design system team, their primary work is not building components. The core components are defined. Ideally, the ecosystem as a whole is contributing components back, or at least building components and making them visible to the community. At that point, the design system team's focus is more on the underlying foundation and architecture that facilitates adoption. What are the main barriers to adoption? Is it about identifying more universal patterns? Is it about creating better SLAs for how the design system team supports other teams in terms of component support? But it's just a much broader view than building individual components or really building the pieces that are going to be consumed so much as supporting the entire ecosystem of design and development implementation across the organization. I mean, you just have to do that at a certain scale. For a company the size of IBM, which is like 300,000 people, you're never going to have a design system team that is big enough if they were just the only team building the things that people needed from a componentry perspective.
Yeah, so you're definitely an advocate of that federation style.
Yes.
It is interesting to think, though, because I get asked this question all the time, right? Like, where does a design system live inside of my organization? Who pays for it? That's fundamentally the question, the subtext of that question, right? Is this something that is design ops? There are a lot of operational components to a design system, but unlike ops, there's actually a lot of like real actual work building the thing instead of just optimizing and working on process. We talked about how it's not just design and it's not just engineering, it's both. And so trying to understand like where this lives is a real challenge that I face pretty frequently in describing to executives and to leadership teams inside of companies as, who manages it and who pays for it. And I think that the federated model breaks that down a little bit, right? About like maybe this should go into a bunch of different people's budgets in some small way. But I'm curious to hear from you guys, like, where do you guys think this lives, and where have you found success in leadership and organizations advocating for people to spend money here?
I think it's difficult because so many companies are so different in how they break things up. So Carbon was very lucky that IBM has the design program office. And so the clear center of excellence for design standards throughout the organization. Now, that's not where Carbon started. Carbon started as the design system for IBM Cloud. And there was a transition point where it was acknowledged as the design system for IBM, but was still within Cloud. And that means that it's being pulled in different directions. Moved into the design program office, was more clearly resourced. It was in the right place also to clearly be acknowledged as the design system for IBM. But it did have the problem that Danny mentioned earlier, that it's then a further step removed from end users and even from the product teams using it to build, so that there is a danger of it being in a little bit of an ivory tower. I think the makeup of the team and its management chain is the most important thing. So I think it needs to be designers and developers, and I don't think they can be managed, or it's more difficult if they're being managed from different chains because they're being pulled in different directions. And really it's a cross-disciplinary team that should be being managed and directed and unified in its direction. And that is kind of dependent on the organization that it's in, is where is the best place for that.
What about you, Danny? How did that shift around? Like, I know you've probably been on multiple executive P&Ls at some point in your journey.
Yeah. I think I really like the way that you guys describe with like a single head and a single business unit that it's tied to. I think in contrast, Procore has always split hairs in the design system with engineering roles going one way and design going another way. But that's, I think it's been tough because, like resourcing is split, so is prioritization. And so trying to lead a single aligned team with different reporting structures can be really tricky. I think the benefit is there's plenty of budget because we're pulling from two pockets. And so generally the budget's never been a problem for us, but alignment is tough, right? So I don't think that's a perfect answer either. I think it's got its own downside. So I don't know if I have an answer for you on this great home for us. I just know we've gone the other direction that IBM's gone, and there's advantages and disadvantages to that.
It's interesting, right? Like there's so many advantages to here's a product owner for my design system that also has the budget and the ability to cross disciplines. There's a huge amount of advantages to that, but there is also a danger there because, while we can all agree that like we're not building a design system for any one product, pulling it too far away from a product organization dilutes the purpose. And that more federated understanding of how that team acquires resources, I guess maybe the central team that just doesn't get too big is not a bad idea. Because I really do fundamentally believe that if your design systems team grows to the point that the core team can't manage itself, that's a huge problem inside of a design system. And it's one of those ones where that federated contribution is pretty essential to supplementing that core team's work. If the core team can do it all, it's probably not being done right. If the core team has 100% contribution federated, it's probably very difficult to manage. So again, that intentional fragmentation versus centralization that we've been sort of riding as a theme.
Yeah, I'm very much, I have a diagram. I talk about the hub and spoke model, really, and the design system team, such as it is and the size that it is, exists as the hub. But then, yeah, the federated pieces are the spokes around that. And that kind of like surfaces everything, makes things visible, has everybody engaged around the same kind of standards and guidelines, so that there's that's why we used the word earlier, fragmentation. It avoids fragmentation while providing the flexibility to deviate with intent. And that's the only way I think you can support it. So the Carbon team, I think, now is about 20 people. And some people will look at that and say, oh, that's a huge design system team. And some people will say, oh, that's a tiny design system team, when you think about the size and scale of IBM. But I think it's about right.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as small when you think about it. There are single products that have hundreds of designers and developers that work on them. And having one that is 20 that represents thousands of products on that system, that feels like a really efficient team.
Yeah, but when you look at the design system code base, Carbon, in the Carbon GitHub, you're talking like 300 or 400 people having contributed to it. And that's because you've got that ecosystem.
Danny, one of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier was kind of some of the stuff around pacing. So when you think about the pace of innovation inside of organizations and how you incrementally capture that ROI, I am kind of curious, do you look at this as like an ROI bomb? Like, is this a big bang where in 6 months your design system launches and goes off and you get $1 million back in your P&L? Or is this something that you view as more likely a much more incremental ramp? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I think I can speak from personal experience here, because we measured ROI for a few years at Procore and really tried to figure out, where were we missing? And one thing I think we learned through iteration was you have to build your design system at the pace your business is expanding. My engineers were so eager to always build another major release, and the designers wanted to redesign the entire library and give it a whole new theme. And as exciting as that is to really push innovation forward, you can't run faster than your product teams can follow you, because then you won't have the adoption. And if you don't have the adoption, you don't have the ROI. And contrary, if you're going too slow, your product teams are running faster than you, and you're not really delivering value to them. They're having to go innovate in their own space, and you're not really bringing value to the business. So one thing we found is really have to understand how fast is the business evolving, and then position your design system to move at that pace. And that's really where you'll see the highest ROI.
That's awesome. I love the idea of like it being like a relay race, right? Like you need to be able to pass that baton at the right moments as you move around the track.
I think it's also important for engendering trust. If you're too slow, then yeah, people are going to lose trust very quickly because you're not bringing value. If you move too fast, particularly Danny talked about major releases. Major releases, breaking changes is a very, very good way to make designers and especially developers not trust their ability to use what you're building. And you have to have a bit of a leap of faith to go and use a bunch of design guidance and code that you didn't build and had no role in building. So the design system has to engender that trust by working at the same pace necessary for the business.
Awesome. So the one last question I have for you guys is, I'm going to take you guys back to when you first started to get into design systems. And if you could reiterate the pitch that you made when you were first looking for budget or first looking for a go-ahead from a leader inside of your organization to work on design systems, what would that pitch look like with today's knowledge?
With the today's knowledge? I wish I'd had today's knowledge when I was making that pitch in the past. But I think it is, going back to what we talked about at the start, it is demonstrably going to bring better quality, and it is going to be faster and more efficient because it's going to make everybody's life easy, and it's going to make it easy to do the right thing. That's the ROI of a design system, is it just makes it easy for everybody to do the right thing by default.
Yeah, I think for Procore, two big values that we kept pitching since day one was consistency and efficiency. And so consistency is something that we all benefit from internally because the code is consistent, or the design patterns are consistent and familiar, but also our customers, they have consistent experiences, and so they're more engaged in our products and more likely to retain our products. And then the efficiency piece is also, how we run our business and helps us scale our business, is that, no longer are you solving problems that have already been solved. You get to focus on the domains that you were hired to solve for. And so you can deliver better product offerings in those discrete spaces that you're focused in. And so, yeah, the consistency and efficiency are really what value the design system provides to the business.
And I suppose actually the biggest change between pitching then and pitching now is I might say something similar back then, but now knowing what people need to fund a design system, I would also say, and here is a bunch of data to prove what I just claimed.
Yeah, so your slide deck is essentially like here's the story of what this is, and that's more or less a lighter touch now than it was 5 years ago. Here's what this provides us in terms of value in the better, faster, more efficient side of things, and then here's a bunch of data that backs that up based on organizations like IBM and Procore that have done this and been very successful at seeing these sorts of ROI returns.
Yeah, and it's very much like here is specific data that we've got internally from IBM. Here from an IX perspective is data about how the clients we've worked with have seen returns. And also, thankfully now, with things like Knapsack's research and other things that are out in the public domain, here is public domain data as well that can also back this up.
Awesome. Well, hey, I just want to say thank you guys for this really incredible conversation. It's been enlightening for me. Really appreciate you taking a couple hours of your day and spending it with me to talk about this stuff. And I hope it provides a really awesome value to that executive that is considering funding a design system and that individual contributor that is out there trying to get some money for this really great idea.
Absolutely. I hope so. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
That's all for today. This has been another episode of the Design Systems Podcast. Thanks for listening. Our producers are Ryan Peterson and Shayna Hodkin. Our musical composer is Wes Willis. Our editor is Zach Barkas. If you have any questions or a topic you'd like to know more about, find us on Twitter at the DS Pod. We'd love to hear from you with show ideas, recommendations, questions, or comments. As always, this pod is brought to you by Knapsack. You can check us out at knapsack.cloud. Have a great day.